Have you ever dreamed of visiting 8 Highland distilleries in just 4 days? Let's do this. Welcome to Whisky Riffs. If you're new to my channel, I'm Kevin, and this is not my usual format for a video. Normally I have a bottle of whiskey and I have a pour and then I'm tasting and reviewing it. Kind of like this. But today, that's not what's going to happen. Today I have a special video that's about the recent trip my wife and I took to Scotland and the many distilleries and sites we saw there. And I'm going to give you a quick overview of those now. And the glass of whiskey is just for me to enjoy while I'm telling you about this wonderful trip we just had. Sláinte. In future episodes, I'll share more about each individual distillery, some of the whiskeys we tasted, and I've got a few bottles behind me that are evidence of the trip we've taken. Let me know in the comments if you have any favorites out of the distilleries we visited and if you want me to do more deep dives on any one of those. Our tour started off in the Edinburgh bus station where we were waiting for our Rabbies tour bus. Rabbies is a tour company that does various tours of Scotland and other places, and specifically they have some great multi-day whiskey tours, and we took one back in 2018 to the Islay area, and this one was for the Highlands. Rabbies is named after the famous Scottish poet Robert Burns. We were waiting for our driver. There was a group of people sitting around waiting for buses. There were 2 Rabbies buses out there, and most of them cleared out and went to the first bus, and we were just sitting there waiting. Then our driver came in, Grant Burns, his real name, by the way. And he said, basically, you ready for your Highland Speyside whiskey tour? We said, well, are we it? Is this all of it? These tours normally carry 10 to 12 people in a bus. I think they fit even a little bit more. And that's our previous experience. And he said, nope, just you 2. I said, and we're still going? He said, yeah, basically. The tour is yours, so if there's anything you want to change on it or things that you want to see that we don't normally go to, let me know. Basically, I'll customize it for you. I mean, what else could you ask for besides a customized whiskey tour of the Highlands? Oh, well, I guess the fact that Grant also plays guitar. So after a bit of a drive, our first distillery stop was the Lindores Abbey. Now this is a very old site. It was one of the first times that the name whiskey was actually documented in any kind of form. There was a request from the king at the time to produce so many barrels of the aquavitae that Lindores Abbey was producing. Documentation shows that distilling was taking place on this site at least as early as 1494. Although it was probably happening long before that. These distillery buildings that we were in are only a few years old, and whiskey distilling started up again in 2017 after more than 500 years. They recently started selling the first fruits of their labor, and we got to taste some of that as well as their aquavitae. Next up on our tour was Dalwhinnie, where we got a quick tour of their warehouse prior to our tasting. The pours of the 4 different expressions were a bit light, but they did include a chocolate pairing, which was unique and kind of tasty. They did pair the chocolates well to the 4 different expressions, and I appreciate that kind of touch to a whiskey tasting. Our hostess even gave us an extra dram of the winter's gold, which was kept in a freezer. Now, cold tends to reduce the flavor of any whiskey, so I don't often chill whiskey, but this was a cool experience and kind of was nice and probably would be good on a hot day. We finished up the day at the Lochgarten Nature Reserve, which was beautiful, and the weather held up for us too. We had very little rain the whole time we were in Scotland, which I guess is kind of rare. The next day, after an overly generous English breakfast, full English breakfast, really full English breakfast, at the B&B we were staying at, we started our day tour with a trip to Glenfarclas. This wasn't on the original tour, but I mentioned to Grant that it was one of the distilleries, one of the whiskeys that I really enjoyed, and he was more than happy to give them a call and schedule a tour and a tasting. Unfortunately, they didn't have time to fit us in on the tour, so it ended up just being a tasting for us. But well done, Grant, for getting that on the schedule. We were able to do a quick tasting of 2 of their expressions, their 10 and 15 year, and I did buy a bottle of the Glenfarclas 15 to bring home with me so I could do a proper tasting on camera with you. After Glenfarclas, we also visited the Craigellachie Bridge to enjoy the nature and the sights and sounds that surround it. There was also a nature walk at GlenGrant, our next distillery stop. So with our lungs full of fresh air, we headed inside for a tasting. There were 3 GlenGrant expressions waiting for us, the Major's Reserve, the Aberlour, and a GlenGrant 10 year. To offset the whiskey, we ate lunch at the Mash Tun in Aberlour, and then it was time for the Speyside Cooperage, which was an amazing tour. I really wasn't thinking too much about this before we went there, but after visiting the place and watching the skilled coopers work, it was just fascinating. Let me know in the comments if you want to hear more about this cooperage or any of the nature spots that I mentioned so far on this tour. Day 2 wasn't done yet. We also managed to book a presentation and tasting at the Cardhu Distillery. You'd never know it by the crappymalts.com website, but Helen Cumming and her daughter-in-law Elizabeth are the real heroes of Cardhu. There was a short film that they showed us before the tasting, and it did a proper job of explaining how important these 2 women were to the distillery of Cardhu and how much they actually influenced kind of the direction of a lot of Highland whiskey. We enjoyed 4 drams in our tasting, the Cardhu 12, their distillery exclusive, a Johnnie Walker Black, and some of their pour your own bottle cask strength expression, which was interesting to taste. Luckily, most of the Speyside distilleries are lumped together pretty close, or we could never have visited so many sites and so many distilleries in the same day. And Grant let me know that we actually set a record for the most distilleries that he's ever taken people to, and you know, I'm pretty proud of that. Day 3 started with a quick stop at the River Spey, which is one of the main reasons all these distilleries exist in this area. The other reason is being in a valley. Any of the tax collectors that were coming into that valley were easily seen before they got down to the bottom of the valley, and all the stills could be quickly hidden. Our first distillery of the day was Glenfiddich, which included a full tour in addition to the tasting. Glenfiddich actually bought their original skills from the women of Cardhu, which further escalates Helen and Elizabeth as whiskey heroes in the scope of the Highland whiskey scene. We were one of the first groups to actually get a look at their new building that housed 12 new stills, and our tasting flight held 4 expressions, the Glenfiddich 12, 15, 18, and their Grand Cru. Normally the tour would have stopped here and the bus would have taken everyone back through the major park there. They would have seen the sights and kind of just talked on the way back to Edinburgh. But we had scheduled 2 other distilleries. One was Aberlour and one was Macallan. So we kind of told Grant that we were planning to just stick around in the area. And he said, sure, let me go ahead and drive you back to Aberlour and to your B&B, where we said our goodbyes and thanked him for his excellent personalized service for our tour. We could not have done that if anyone else was in the group. After some lunch in Aberlour, we actually just walked the 10 to 15 minutes to the Aberlour Distillery, and they gave us a unique blind tasting. I've never had a blind tasting at a distillery, but this one was really well done and an awful lot of fun. I ended up buying 2 bottles of Aberlour to take home, so I guess it worked. On Saturday, our unscheduled 4th day of the tour, we decided a while back, I mean this was months back, because this trip was delayed a whole year plus, that we were going to visit the Macallan Distillery and see their brand new building. Judy set up a mastery tour for us, which was pretty pricey, and started at noon and was supposed to end around 5 p.m. So 5-hour tour of a distillery sounded a little intimidating. But this tour included a 6-course meal with wine pairings, a tour of the distillery, and 2 sets of tastings. It's definitely not cheap, but I would happily do it again. The food was even more delicious than the Scotch. The Macallan Distillery building is just an architectural masterpiece. It's really impressive the way they built it. Some people would say that it's too modern for a distillery, but I think a lot of thought went into it, and I was pretty damn impressed. As I said in the beginning, if you want me to do a deep dive on any of the distilleries in this video, just let me know in the comments below. And if you're planning to do any tours of the distilleries in Scotland, I highly recommend the Rabbies Tour. They are excellent at what they do. You don't have to have a driver set up in your tastings. It was a shame to see a couple of the people that were there in the tastings with us. They had to say, well, I'm the driver, so I don't get to actually taste the whiskey. I gave them take-home tastings, but it's not the same. We had none of that because we had Grant, our driver, taking us around, or we were just walking back to our B&B. So it's really nice to have this kind of tour. They also know a lot about the history of Scotland. They tell stories, and we had a really fun time in 2018 when we did our Islay tour. Even though the bus was full, it was full of really fun people, some that had been on this tour 6, 7, and 8 times, and they just enjoyed whiskey and appreciated everything that was going on with the whole tour process. And my suitcase managed to hold about 6 bottles of Scotch that I purchased at the various distilleries that I couldn't get locally here, and I will be doing deep dives on all of those in upcoming episodes. I hope you enjoyed this quick overview of our tour of Scotland and the Highland distilleries. If you did, please give me a like below. It really helps this video spread out to other parts of YouTube. And until the next video, which will be a regular review, take care of yourself. Take care of the people around you, and cheers.